And Pogba leaves for McTominay! Magnificent! It's Moraes, he's done it again! He has fizzed that into the bottom corner. Vardy for Chowdhury. And set for Madison! He is one bright young thing! Alisson saw Salah running from his own half, so onside here, Mo Salah. Salah to settle it! In front of the clock! There's no feeling like that feeling! And now you've got to believe them. You have got to believe them.
Hey guys, welcome back to the 3PL podcast. We're back after a very hectic Christmas period. It's a new year, which means we're pretty much halfway through the season now. With the FA Cup taking place this coming weekend, we thought it'd be a good time to review the season so far and how it's gone for every team in the Premier League. We also have Andy on later, who's a Sheffield United fan, and he'll be giving us a unique insight as to how their season's gone for them so far. Obviously not great, but without further ado, we'll start at the top of the alphabetical Premier League, at least, with Arsenal, who have really turned things around recently. I don't think many of us would have predicted this a couple of weeks ago. They looked in turmoil. Arteta wasn't getting the players up for the games, it seems, and seems like it was going all in the wrong direction. But then you look at the last three results now, 3 wins on the bounce, convincing wins as well. And dare I say it, is it a turning point for Arsenal now?
Yeah, I mean, they've certainly turned things around the last 3 games, haven't they? It's been a massive, massive improvement, not just in the results, but just in the way they've played, the positivity, creating chances. I think they've got, is it more than a third of their points this season have come in their last 3 games, which is, shows quite how much of a difference they've made. It's hard, though, really, to pinpoint what has changed. There's no real obvious signs of what's happened in the background or any one player performing at a better level than they were before. It just seems like they've all suddenly just found a gear that they didn't have before, and they're playing a lot more the way that we would have expected them to from the start. So, yeah, really positive signs for them. The only worry will be, I guess, if this is the blip and actually they are still really bad and they've just had a run of 3 good fixtures. We'll just have to wait and see until after the FA Cup break to see what happens with that.
Yeah, I guess that's definitely a possibility. I mean, 3 wins on the bounce doesn't really get you anywhere in the Premier League long term, but short term, I guess it's boosted them up to 11th now. And yeah, I mean, how much further could they go? At the moment, they're only 10 points off top spot in the Premier League, which is kind of ridiculous considering where they were like last month. But they've turned it around with 3 wins on the bounce, and it's credit really to Arteta and bringing in a lot of the young players that hadn't really featured too much in the weeks before that. I think Emile Smith-Rowe's been one of those players who stepped into the first team now, and he really looks comfortable in that role, almost like an Ozil role behind the striker, picking up all the loose balls and really, being influential in setting up goals. And obviously, Saka is one of those players as well, but he was obviously very prominent in early in the season as well. But yeah, I mean, positive signs for Arsenal. I think they'll probably get a bit carried away and think they can win the league at this point. But I think caution's probably the best way to evaluate their season so far. I don't think they can really nail down a title push at this point, but they've got players coming back into their team like Thomas Partey. I think he'll be massively valuable when he comes back into the team. For Arsenal, it's promising, but whether they can actually push on and get top 4, which they probably wanted at the start of the season, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think realistically, they're probably still just looking at a top 10 as their aim now. As much as they've shown good form in the last 3 games, they've shown real signs of weakness so far in the season. And I think it would be naive for anyone, let alone Arsenal fans, to think that they're going to continue this good form for the rest of the season. There will be low points. There will be games that they just really struggle in still, especially when you're relying on youngsters who will be full of beans, they'll be lively and they'll have some great performances in them. But there will also be games where they'll just get completely undone. Man City, Liverpool are the kind of teams that could really teach them a lesson and still sort of capitalise on their naivety. So we'll see how they do. I can't see anything more than like a solid top 10 for them though.
All right, next up we have Aston Villa, a team who have, I guess, arguably overachieved so far this season. They've been really, really impressive in most of their games. 8 wins already this season, and you compare that to last season where they're in a relegation battle and they only really were saved by a disallowed goal against Sheffield United at Villa Park. It's a massive turnaround for them. Really good summer signings. Yes, not all of them have hit the ground running. I don't think Ollie Watkins is quite at his best yet, but you look at some of the other players who've come into that team, Martinez especially. What a game changer he's been for them. Couldn't buy a clean sheet before he came into the team, but now he looks like a mainstay in goal. Yeah, all in all, it's been a very impressive start to the season for Aston Villa, and I guess a lot of that's down to Jack Grealish and how influential he is in that team. But a lot of people have been surprised by Aston Villa so far this season. Are you surprised as well?
Massively surprised by them. I think if I remember correctly, I tipped them to go down in my predictions in our very first episode. It doesn't look like that's going to happen at all. But I think a huge part of that does come down to just how well Jack Grealish is playing. There's a lot to be said for how much of a difference it can make to team morale and team spirit, and just generally to how well the rest of the team plays when you have one absolute star performing at their highest level that they've ever performed at. I think I may have said this before. It reminds me a lot of how when West Ham had Dimitri Payet, it just the rest of the team seemed to find just another level because they were seeing the things he was doing, and it almost made them empowered to do more. And I think that's part of what's kicking Aston Villa on this year. It seems sort of unimaginable that you could go from being literally sort of off relegation by 1 point or by goal difference one season and then arguably pushing to be in the top four the next season. I don't think they will get top four. I think the season's long and there's going to be some real fixture congestion coming up, and they're one of those teams that, yes, they made some good signings, but they haven't got the biggest squad depth in the league. So there'll definitely be some periods where they're going to suffer, and I can see those sort of maybe on the horizon over the next few weeks. But yeah, just a really, really positive start for them. They've done really well, and there's a lot to be happy about if you're an Aston Villa fan at the moment.
Yeah, like you said, I guess the only worry is that Jack Grealish goes down with a bad injury, in which case I think it could all unravel for Aston Villa, because we've seen it with other teams. If they lose the talisman, like Crystal Palace with Zaha, fingers crossed that doesn't happen, because I think Jack Grealish is probably in the best form of his career, and he's probably going to be featuring for England at the Euros if he continues to play this well. So fingers crossed for him, he stays fit, and fingers crossed, I guess, for Aston Villa as well, because they really could push for Europe this season, I think.
Okay, so moving on to the next team, Brighton, currently sitting 17th in the table on 14 points. Really, really struggling for form at the moment. I think still only got one win in their last 15 games or something like that in all competitions. Really surprising, I think, actually, because the first few games of the season, they started off really well, played some lovely football, and they were arguably unlucky with a lot of their results. But I don't know, it all seems to have caught up with them now, and now after, 17 games, they've only got 2 wins. That's really relegation form, I guess. It's all very well and good playing nice football, but unless you're going to pick up the points, you're going to struggle. And their position is sort of elevated by just how many draws they've had, I think. And a lot of those games could easily have been defeats. It's really hard to predict how their second half of the season is going to go, I think. Probably one of the hardest ones to predict. They could fly up the table, or they could sort of carry on just really struggling for points. I'm inclined to think more so that they're going to stay down the bottom and have to contend with the relegation battle towards the end of the season.
Yeah, I really thought Brighton might push on this season. They had a fairly good summer window, brought in some experienced players, Danny Welbeck, Adam Lallana. But like you said, some of those games where they've drawn or lost, they could have easily won those games. That there were chances for them. The one that I always go back to is that Manchester United game where they lost out in a very, very late penalty. And since then, I don't really feel like they've picked themselves up. And as much as Graham Potter plays great football for Brighton, but he's just not really getting the results. And it's all, like you said, it's all very well playing good football, but if you're not going to pick up results, then you are pretty much doomed in this division. And in the Premier League, we've seen it before, it's pretty ruthless. So if you are playing good football, you better make sure you're winning games, because you're going to be at the bottom of the league otherwise. And that's kind of where they find themselves. And yeah, unfortunately, I just don't see where the points are coming from. I think they're going to have to go into the transfer market this January, maybe buy an experienced striker to actually get them some guaranteed goals, because right now, relying on Maupay and Welbeck, I don't think that's going to work out too well. So yeah, it's going to be a tough end to the season for Brighton. And halfway through, it's not looking good.
Yeah, and I think one thing with Brighton that maybe has let them down this year is I just don't think Adam Lallana has had this kind of impact that a lot of people would have expected him to, and that they were kind of relying on him to. He was an experienced Premier League player that they brought in to kind of run that midfield and provide that creative spark. And he's not really performed at the level that, well, definitely not at the level that we've seen him perform at in the past. And then you look at the rest of their midfield, and there's just not really many players in there that are going to create much. They're relying a lot on their strikers and their front men to actually create their own goals. And then you move up to the front and you look, and they've got Maupay, who has been really good this year. But realistically, in terms of people to partner him up front, it's Danny Welbeck, and we know what he's like with injuries. So I think they're going to struggle with that without the ability to score goals or create anything from midfield. And then if their front men aren't doing it either, that's going to be a really big stumbling block for them going forward.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised that they sold Aaron Moy in the summer. I thought he was their most influential player season upon season, a playmaker, someone who could foster midfield. And signing Adam Lallana as his replacement, I wouldn't say is a like-for-like swap. And I really do feel like they missed out on a driving, creative midfield player, because we just haven't seen that from Lallana. And I'm not sure at 32, 33 years old, whoever old he is at this point, if he's ever going to be able to provide that for Brighton. So yeah, maybe some poor business done by Brighton there to let someone like Aaron Moy go, even if it is to China, and even if they did get good money for him. Okay, next up we have Burnley, a team who started the season really poorly, actually, and that surprised me because they have this notorious reputation for being a very stubborn, hard to break down team, but they seem to just not start the season at all, and they didn't really start the season well. But since then, the last 6 games, they've only lost one of them, and they've beat some good teams in there as well. They've got a win against Wolves, a win away at the Emirates against Arsenal, and finally they're starting to find some form. And I think that's really down to some key players that they have being in top form. You look at Nick Pope, Ben Mee, and Tarkowski. I think that's probably the best defensive pairings in the Premier League, really, in terms of goalkeepers and centre backs. I do think they're probably, if not the best, then up there with the top 5 in the league. And then I guess they're not particularly exciting to watch going forward, but they do have Chris Wood up front, who does get goals. When you put all that together, yes, Burnley aren't particularly attractive to watch, but they're always going to pick up points at this level. So credit to Sean Dyche, who's managed to turn the boat around when it probably was beginning to sink.
Yeah, definitely. And with Burnley, you know what you're going to get, don't you? You're never going to get exciting attacking football. And Sean Dyche knows that, and everyone at Burnley knows that. So yes, they're not going to score beautiful goals, but if Chris Wood can bang in a few and get some headers, then that's going to keep them in the division. And it has done every year for the last few years. I think if you'd said to me at the start of the season that after 17 games, Burnley would be 16th on 16 points, I'd be thinking, yeah, that sounds about right. That's pretty much where you'd expect them to be. But yeah, credit to them. They turned it around because it did look like they were going to be really struggling, and they've sort of got themselves out of that immediate relegation battle. They just need to keep this good form going, and you can see them sort of being fairly consistently sort of above that relegation battle, but not really pushing for the top half. Arguably, could they ask for any more with the squad that they've got? I don't think they really can, unless they're going to really invest in that team. That's where they're destined to sit for seasons to come.
Yeah, and I guess they rely on selling players to make revenue and to raise funds to sign new players. And James Tarkowski is one that was rumoured away in the summer. Do you see him leaving in January? I know he's been turning down contract after contract from Burnley. Do you think he could be off to a better club in the Premier League, or do you think he'll stick out the season with Burnley?
I think it really depends who comes in for him, because I know West Ham went in for him in the summer, and he was very against that because of how settled his family is in that area of the country. And I think you're talking them really. If one of the Manchester clubs came in for him, then he'd probably go for that because then he gets to stay in the same place. But realistically, are United or City going to go for Tarkowski? I doubt it. Maybe more so United, but I think they're fairly set for their centre backs as well. They've got some good players in there. City spend millions on their centre backs, and they've already got about 4 of them who are worth 50 million plus each. So I can't see them buying another one. So no, I think it's all well and good in turning down contracts, but I can't see a club coming in for him that are going to pay the money that Burnley will want and offer him what he wants. So I think he'll be there at the end of the season. Right, up next we've got Chelsea, who have had a real fall from grace over the last few weeks. They were flying high at the top of the Premier League for most of the start of the season, and now they're sitting in 9th place, having suffered 4 defeats and a draw in their last 6 games. It's really all fallen apart for Lampard, isn't it? It looked so promising, and now we're really starting to see their weaknesses. I mean, is that a sign, do you think, of where Chelsea realistically should be in the league, or do you think they're really underperforming at the moment?
I guess this could be a very biased opinion, but I've never really rated Frank Lampard as a manager. And to me, I think he's just got one too many personalities in this team now to handle. He's obviously made some really big signings in the summer. Kai Havertz, Timo Werner, people that you would bring in specifically to score goals, be the key players in your team, but they just haven't been those players for Chelsea this season. And I don't know how much time you can give them to settle into a team. Frank Lampard's obviously given them enough chances, but Timo Werner, a guy who scored 34 goals last season in the Bundesliga, has only scored, I think they've only got 5 goals between them, Havertz and Werner, and that's just really, really poor return for 2 players that you probably spent over 80 million on. So I don't know how much you can blame Frank Lampard in terms of performance. These players obviously need to be performing at a higher level, and they're just not at the moment. But I don't know, these results recently, especially the loss against Everton, the loss against Arsenal especially, I think raised a lot of eyebrows. Obviously, many people expected Chelsea just to cruise versus Arsenal, but they didn't, and they looked like they struggled, and they've struggled ever since, really. They got a draw at home against Aston Villa, and then they basically got outplayed in every single department against Man City. So if I was Abramovich, I would be starting to lose my patience with Frank Lampard, and to me, I think he's got maybe 3 or 4 more bad results in him, and then he's going to be gone, because at this point, they're dropping out of the top 10, and they've got a team that really should be pushing for Champions League. So yeah, it's not a great place for Frank Lampard to be right now.
No, it's really not. And I think one of the things that we've said before that I think they're really suffering from is just almost too many world-class players that can't all fit into the team. So therefore are not all getting their consistent time in there, not gelling as a team, not gelling a style of play. And it's really coming back to bite them, I think. You look at their sort of like attack-minded midfielder slash forward slash strikers. You've got Havertz, Pulisic, Ziyech, Mount, Hudson-Odoi, Werner, Abraham and Giroud. I know some of those are strikers, some of those are wingers, some of those are attacking midfielders, but at the end of the day, they're all in the team to do the same sort of job in terms of just getting the ball forward to get goals. And at the end of the day, you cannot fit all of those into the same team week in, week out. You could almost play two teams of that front line by putting them all together. There's not going to be any consistency with that. And I think it reminds me of when I used to play career mode on FIFA, and I'd just sign all of the young wonder kids that I could find, and then I just wouldn't be able to fit them all in the team, and they'd all be disgruntled and miserable, and none of them would have good morale, and then it would just all fall apart. And it's like Lampard's doing this. He's got his first big management job in the Premier League, and he's made that classic mistake that we all made many, many times in our teenage years. It's obviously simplifying it a bit, but it does sometimes feel like that's the problem they're suffering from.
Yeah, I totally agree. It just reeks of that kind of situation. Last season, we saw how good the youngsters were at Chelsea. They had these emerging talents, especially Tammy Abraham, who was bagging goals pretty much every week. And Callum Hudson-Odoi was just coming into the team and starting to show how good an impact he could have. And also Mason Mount, all these midfield players who they've almost replaced this summer with high-profile German talent. I just don't think they needed to do it. And if anything, it's almost like if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation, whereas he's tried to fix something that wasn't broken. And now he's sat there with all these players who want to be playing every week on big wages, and he just can't squeeze them all into one team. And that's ultimately where they are now. And obviously, they've been rumoured to be signing Haaland as well, another striker to add to the mix. I just don't think they need to be buying anyone else. Honestly, I think Chelsea have just been very guilty of buying probably 3 too many players. And if they hadn't have done that, I think they would have a much more settled team and probably more consistent form, which they've really lacked this season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a mess of Lampard's own creation that he's going to have to deal with. And I think the danger is he's not going to be given the time to deal with it. I know a lot of Chelsea fans are saying, well, Alex Ferguson was given years and years to get it right at Man United, but Alex Ferguson is an anomaly really that stands out from the crowd in terms of the way football goes. And just because you give Lampard years and years doesn't mean he's actually going to go on to be the next Alex Ferguson. So it's a dangerous game to play, and I don't think Abramovich is going to have the patience to let that game play out, unfortunately. Moving on to the next team then, Crystal Palace, who sit in 14th place on 22 points. It's been a fairly up and down season for them, hasn't it? They've had some results which have looked fantastic, and then they've had some absolute shockers. The 7-0 against Liverpool springs to mind, which they followed up with a 3-0 defeat to Aston Villa. Some results in there that really make you wonder about the credentials of the team. But then there's been other results where they've looked absolutely brilliant. They're a really hard team to judge at this stage, I think.
Yeah, you look at their record this season, 6 wins, 7 losses, almost dead even. And that's kind of where they are in the league as well, like almost in the middle. I think they're 11 points off the bottom or relegation and 11 points off top. And they're so reliant on Wilfried Zaha, as we say every time we talk about Crystal Palace this season. Without him, they don't function. And those games that they've lost this season heavily have been without him. And I think that just shows his value. Obviously, they've got players that come in his place, like Eze, and he's really starting to show just how good he is. We saw that goal last weekend against Sheffield United, and it really was something special to watch. But whether he can do that on a regular basis will be very important for Crystal Palace going forwards, because they can't keep relying on Wilfried Zaha, who inevitably you would think will leave at some point. And when he does, yes, it's going to be very difficult to replace. Without him, you look at where the goals are coming from in that team, and they're not going to come from Benteke, they're not going to come from Jordan Ayew, they're not going to come from anyone else. So replacing him is going to be massively difficult, and you can understand why, I guess, they've kept hold of him for so long.
Yeah, and the other thing with Palace that really I can't help but think every time I watch them is I look at Roy Hodgson on the sidelines, especially in this cold weather, and I just think, get yourself home. You don't need to be out there at this age managing a Premier League team. It's not for you now. He just looks so tired and miserable every time. I wonder whether give it the end of this season and he'll think, actually, I've had enough of this. This isn't worth the stress anymore. And then you wonder, where do Palace go from there? Because they've been really solid with him for the last couple of seasons now. He's steadied the ship there. He's made them a solid mid-table team. They could end up going down the same route that we've seen many clubs go down, where they appoint an exciting attacking manager and it all looks great to start with and then falls apart. Or do they gamble with somebody from their youth setup? it'll be really interesting to see what direction Palace go on beyond Hodgson's reign there, which I don't see lasting too much longer. And then moving on to Everton, who have had a really good season, I think, overall. They're sitting 7th in the table on 29 points, which is probably about as high up as they could have hoped to have been before the season started. Arguably, they could almost be a bit disappointed with it now, considering some of the football they've played and how solid they've looked at times. But they have had some poor results in there. And I think that's sort of why they deserve to really be where they are, just sort of on the fringes of those European spots. And I think realistically, that's probably where they will stay and finish for the rest of the season.
Yes, obviously at the start of the season, you're expecting Everton to do crazy things, and to an extent, they still are. They're still within touching distance of top place in the Premier League, and if they hadn't lost 3 games in a row back in, I think it was September, October, they'd be right up there. But as it is, they really lost form when Richarlison dropped out of the team, and they're starting to refine that form now, ignoring the last result against West Ham. I think that was a bit of an anomaly maybe, but generally they've been very, very strong, both at home and away. And that's without some of their really key players as well. You look at the players they brought in the summer, like Allen, James Rodriguez as well, who's also struggled with injury. Yeah, they've done really well to manage what is almost a bit of an injury crisis. And it's credit really to Ancelotti, who's managed to almost mould players into different positions. Look at Ben Godfrey, who's gone to right back, he's a centre back, and it's very smart man management from him, and you'd expect nothing less from someone with his experience. But yeah, I guess it's a really great sign for Everton that they've managed to come through and get some good results without their full strength team. And I think when they do get these players back, like Digne, Allen, I think Gabambin as well is going to be one of those players who comes back. He's been 2 seasons out of the Premier League now, but he's had injuries. But when he comes back, he could seal down a place in midfield. And then when they do, who knows? Champions League could be within their sights this season. Okay, moving on to Fulham, a team probably with less lofty ambitions, sitting 18th in the Premier League with 11 points, started pretty abysmally this season, really struggled to get that first win, but when they got it, they seem to have sort of turned a corner, and you look at their last 6 results and they've only lost once. It's just the draws really which are becoming a problem for them. They've drawn their last 4 games and they're not really scoring too many goals, unfortunately, but I think we all thought that would be a problem at the start of the season anyway, but they just haven't really seemed to have found a solution. Yes, defensively they look stable now, but I think they do need to maybe delve into the transfer window and at least bring in a striker who can bag at 10 goals before the end of the season, because right now I don't think you're going to get goals out of Mitrovic or Reed.
Yeah, with Fulham, I almost I don't know, I've got a bit of a soft spot for them over the last few games, because I think they have fought really well and they've deserved to pick up some points and sort of start to claw their way out of what was looking like a disastrous season right at the very beginning. It could still turn out that way, and they could very well still end up getting relegated. I think the squad that they've got, it would not be surprising if they did get relegated. But they're a team that have got something to prove in the Premier League. They always come up and then go straight back down. And it'd be nice if they sort of planted themselves as one of those teams that stays consistently for a few years. So I'm hopeful that they'll get enough points to avoid relegation. I do just worry that their squad doesn't have the depth that it needs and the quality that it needs to really compete with the top teams. And also when it gets to that real business end of the season, it starts getting really, really dangerous around there. It's whether the other teams have just got that little edge over them that might prevent them from picking up enough points. But yet to be seen. I think they've done really well the last few weeks to sort of get those points on the board and steady themselves. So looking forward to seeing what they can show us over the start of the second half of the season. And then moving on to Leeds, 12th in the table. They've got 23 points now, which for a promoted team is a pretty solid place to be after coming up and fighting at a time when football is not the way we expected it to be when Leeds returned to the Premier League. So I think they've done a great job. I do still think, as we've said before, they've got that tactical sort of style that just makes them really, really unpredictable. And if they carry on playing like that, there will be games where they get absolutely destroyed. They're going to lose games 6-2 to Man United, and they're going to lose games 3-0, 4-0. But then also they're going to score 5 goals against teams like Newcastle and West Brom, and they're going to carry on like that. I think they'll probably end the season with more goals in their games than any other team, and it's been thoroughly enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of it.
Yeah, I guess Leeds are the epitome of an inconsistent team, really. They go from one week looking like one of the best teams in the league to the next week shipping 6 goals and looking extremely vulnerable at the back and almost inept going forward. So I don't know whether to credit Bielsa or to criticise them, because obviously it's great to watch when it's going well, but when it's not going well, it's like, surely you should be doing something else right now tactically. But he just seems to stick with his tactics, and to be fair to him, it's worked out so far. 23 points is a good return from how many games they've played, and with the squad he has as well. I don't think there's been too much money pumped into this squad. Yes, they've made some big summer signings and on Rodrigo and Rafinha, but aside from that, it's a pretty championship squad, and it's really credit to the way they play and the way they really take teams on. They're not scared of anyone, and it's a great way to play when you come up because it intimidates a lot of teams like we saw last season with Sheffield United. So yeah, fair play to Leeds, and I think they'll probably go a bit higher before the season ends, I reckon. Right, moving on to Leicester, a team who are probably just about where they want to be this season. They've been challenging up at the top of the league all season, haven't really lost too many games, especially not games they should be losing. Yeah, it's been impressive, and it's kind of what we're used to now with Leicester. They battle against the odds. They've got a very good, solid team, and they continue to surprise everyone despite the lack of investment in the team. They just have Jamie Vardy up there who continues to run his socks off, score goals, and yeah, I mean there aren't too many standout players in this team. You look at the team and the squad depth. There aren't too many like star names, but nevertheless, Brendan Rodgers gets the best out of them, and third in the Premier League, 1 point up top. Honestly, it wouldn't be that surprising if they were challenging for the title come the end of the season.
They've absolutely got the position in the table to allow them to do that. My concern really is, as you said, when you mentioned Jamie Vardy, it's that lack of cover for him that's got to be a worry for them, because if he does pick up an injury, they do look a very different team. They lose that threat and they just have a completely different style of play. I think it's probably the game against Crystal Palace that they drew 1-1 when they were 1-0 down. Jamie Vardy didn't start that game. And when he came on the pitch, yes, he didn't score the goal. He wasn't actually involved in the goal that got the equaliser for them at all, but it just gave them an outlet that they didn't have. And it is very clear to see that without him in the team, they really can struggle at times. But if he can stay fit, or if they can get someone in to cover him that can sort of play that role of being his backup, then there's no reason they can't be pushing for the title. And at the very least, they should be aiming for a Champions League space, which they so narrowly missed out on last season.
Yeah, I think they're definitely going to be up there. And whether they can get a replacement in January this year, I'm not sure. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult to sign players with COVID and the new restrictions now with Brexit. But I think they definitely need to replace Iheanacho, really. I've seen Iheanacho play a couple of times this season, and he just looks almost championship quality at this point. I think the one start he had this season was against Palace, and he missed a penalty. I just think his confidence is so low at the moment that he's not going to be that guy ever to come in and replace Jamie Vardy. So if they can get someone in who can ably replace Vardy, I don't see any reason why they can't be in the Champions League, especially when you look at the players who are coming back into the team now, like Ricardo Pereira, who they've missed out. He's missed out for most of the season at this point. He's probably one of their best defenders. And James Maddison now really seems to be hitting the same highs that he was hitting before he got that injury last season. So I think if everything goes to plan for Leicester, they'll be up there. But again, there's a lot that has to go to plan there.
Yeah, there's one player that I can think of that I wonder if he would be interested in signing for them. I've heard rumours that Marko Arnautovic is looking for a route back to the Premier League. It looks as though West Ham are interested in getting him back in, but probably can't afford his wages, which may then end up being the same issue for Leicester. But he seems like exactly the kind of player that could provide great cover for Jamie Vardy. I wonder if they might have a look at that before the end of the window.
Yes, a good shout. They'd have to fork out a lot for his wages, but I think it would be money well spent at this point. Right, moving on to Liverpool, the team top of the league at the moment. Obviously, absolutely ravaged by injuries this season. Joe Gomez went out with a big injury. Virgil van Dijk, obviously, we know about, out for the season. Other players as well over the course of the season have always dropped out of the side with injury. For large parts, they've kind of coped with it pretty well, but recently they've really come up short against some teams that they should be putting away. And I think they're starting to feel the fatigue. All these players have had to play so much the last couple of weeks without any rests. And that's really starting to come to the fore now, I think, in my opinion. And I think it's going to be a struggle for Liverpool to hit the same highs they hit last season. They've been obviously very good this season. We've seen that against Crystal Palace, especially, 7-0 win. But that lack of depth now in defence, especially, is really starting to hurt them. Obviously, we had Henderson at centre-back against Southampton. Obviously, they lost that game. I mean, they're just rotating players now who they think can play there. Like Fabinho's obviously not an out-and-out centre-back, but he's playing there. And if they don't sign a centre-back this January, I don't think they're going to be able to challenge for the title. That's my honest opinion.
Yeah, the trouble for me with Liverpool is every time that I think they're struggling and I start to doubt them, they come back and they just go on an amazing run and blow everyone away. So it is really tough. I am so inclined to agree with you that they look really tired, they look out of it. But then we've got FA Cup weekend coming up, and we know how Klopp treats the FA Cup. He'll play a team of people we've never heard of before, and he'll give everyone else a chance to rest and recover, get some sort of better training under their belts, rehabilitate a bit, and then they'll probably come back in and absolutely blow everyone away again. But I do agree with you in the sense of the centre-back cover. That's the area that they're struggling with, that you can't carry on the season playing players out of position in that centre-back position, because it is so vital in the Premier League. We've seen it time and time again. Teams without good centre-backs or good defensive stability just get torn apart. And Liverpool are, there's a danger of them getting torn apart by some of the teams with more able attacks. So it's really hard to call for them. They've shown for the last couple of seasons how good they are as a team and how well they can manage sort of adversity and get through it. But it does look like if there's ever a time they're going to falter and not be at the top of their game, it's this season.
And do you think it's a necessity for them to sign a centre back in January, or do you think they can wait until the summer?
I think something needs to come in January. But the trouble is, we know how bad January transfer window is for trying to get a good deal, and Liverpool have spent a decent amount of money on players already over the last couple of years. So it's whether they can afford to bring in the kind of quality that they need, because it's not like you're talking about replacing your fourth choice centre-back. You're talking about replacing Virgil van Dijk, arguably one of the best centre-backs in the world, and Joe Gomez, who also has been up there performing at the very best. So I think they need something in January. I'm just worried they won't get it. Okay, so moving on to Liverpool's main title contenders for the last couple of seasons, Man City, who are currently sitting in 5th place in the Premier League, where not a lot of people thought they would be come the start of the season. But they've had some pretty bad results, but they've also been very consistent recently. They've had some really good wins, some solid performances. I feel like the last 3 games we've seen the side of City that we've been used to for the last couple of years. And having said everything we just said about Liverpool, I think City are just priming themselves to go on an absolute run of multiple back-to-back wins and absolutely storm their way to the top of the Premier League. I can see them pushing on to win it, honestly. I really wouldn't be surprised at this stage.
Unfortunately, I agree. I did tip Man City before the season started, but right now I think they're primed for a title push. They've been inconsistent at best this season, especially at the start. But recently, you look at the last 6 results, no losses in there. They're hardly conceding goals anymore. That's massive for them, especially when they've spent so much money in defence. I think it's really important that they start to actually prove that they're good enough to keep clean sheets week in, week out. And that's exactly what they're doing at the moment. And they've got a really solid partnership with John Stones and Ruben Diaz, their big money signings in the summer. Cancelo, even Nathan Ake, when he came into the team, looked pretty solid. So all in all, it's really good signs for them. I think all they need now is a striker to stay fit for a little bit. We've not seen Gabriel Jesus or Aguero play a regular run of games this season, and as a result, they kind of struggled for goals. But I think when they do come back in, especially Aguero, they're going to be very difficult to keep quiet. And at that point, I think it might just be destined for them to make a title push. And you wouldn't put anything past Pep, and I think they're almost perfectly placed already to make those moves. So yeah, it's credit to them because they've really had to deal with some injuries as well. But they've come on strong, and unlike Liverpool, I think they're actually coming into their prime right now, other than starting to tire.
Yeah, do you think, talking about their striker situation, obviously Sergio Aguero has been back from injury for a little while, but he's clearly still not fully match fit, and he's getting to an age where it's going to take him longer and longer to recover from those injuries. Is there any chance that, do you think Man City could make a move for another striker? The one that springs to mind as someone that we know is interested again on a move back to the Premier League is Diego Costa. It would seem like a good fit for them, I think. I can imagine him fitting in well and providing good cover in that striking position.
I think if it wasn't for his personality and his demeanour, I think it would be a really good fit for them. But we've seen what he can do to a team. He can almost bring everyone around him down, and he did that at Chelsea. I think he's done that now at Atletico Madrid. They've terminated his contract. I just don't think he's a particularly helpful person to have in the dressing room. Yes, he's a great striker, and I think somebody in the Premier League probably will take him. I'm just not sure Pep will quite buy into Diego Costa, the man. So for that reason, I think they're probably better suited looking elsewhere. But personally, I don't think they need a striker this season. Maybe in the summer. Obviously, Aguero is getting a bit older now, but right now, I think once they both hit form and keep fit, I think they'll be difficult to keep quiet. Okay, moving on to the red side of Manchester, a team who are now second in the Premier League, which is almost unbelievable. I can't believe I'm saying it, but they've really turned things around almost like Arsenal have, but even more drastically. In September, we thought, Ollie might be for the chop first in the sack race, but he's stuck with it, or they've stuck with him, and it's really paid dividends. They've looked pretty good recently, and they've picked up results where they probably shouldn't have. Again, they go goals behind, but then come back to win. But more recently, they've been pretty comfortable, and I think it's taken a real team effort as well. You look at players that we were slagging off earlier in the season, like Paul Pogba and his desire to play for Manchester United, but the last couple of weeks he's really turned around and done a whole 360 on his mentality, and he looks like one of their better players now. And as for everyone else, defensively looking solid, and they're always going to be dangerous up front with Fernandes providing almost everything they have going forward. So yeah, I mean it's a promising sign for Manchester United. I don't know if they can sustain a title push, but they're definitely in a position to.
Yeah, it's got to be exciting for United fans to be at that position, level on points with Liverpool and pushing for the top of the table, because it's been a long time since they could really arguably say they've actually been in a title race. They've definitely got the players to do it. I think some of the quality in their team is there to be seen. It just comes down to whether they can keep that form up. We've definitely seen times when they've really struggled. And even I think some of those struggles have been covered up in the last few games by the results they've got. Although they've had some good results, there have still been some where they've flattered to deceive. And I think, the 1-0 win against Wolves, and even to an extent the 2-1 win against Aston Villa, those games could very easily have gone the other way. And if they had gone the other way, we'd be sitting here talking about a completely different position in the table and a completely different form. So I don't think it's time for United fans to get too carried away, but it's been so long for them that I can see why they are getting excited about it. And it would be nice to see, in some ways, United, Liverpool, and City battle it out for the title, wouldn't it? It would be fairly apt that those three teams with such rivalries between them go head to head to get there. But I wouldn't be surprised if United drop back down to sort of the Europa League spots or fighting for that fourth top four spot.
Yeah, if there's any fan base that's going to get carried away after a couple of good results, it's United fans. So hopefully for their sake it keeps up a bit longer, but they're in good position as it stands. Moving on to Newcastle, a team who have really just flattered to deceive this season. They've been poor. Honestly, I think they're probably the worst team I've seen in the Premier League this season in terms of consistent performances. They've just not been good enough. They're actually pretty lucky to be sitting on 19 points, in my opinion. I think that's probably a good 5 too many. They don't play attractive football. They don't have good players, really. They don't seem to create too much, and that probably is down to a lot of their players still being out as the result of COVID. I think Alan Saint-Maximin is one of their best players, and he's been out ever since he went down with COVID. So I think that's a real big loss for them. But I don't think it's just down to that. I think Steve Bruce really does have to kind of take some kind of acknowledgement that this is somewhat his fault. I don't think he's ever been particularly renowned for playing particularly good football, but the football I've seen from Newcastle recently really isn't good enough. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he's the next one to get the boot.
Yeah, their last few results have been really poor, haven't they? Like the game against Man City just said it all for me. I mean, they barely even turned up to that game. It was just the easiest win Man City could possibly have asked for. I reckon the Man City players could have turned up to that, given that Christmas Day was the day before. They could have been on the booze all day long Christmas Day, and they'd still have won that game easily, because Newcastle just offered absolutely nothing. They just gave City way too much respect. They sat back off them. They didn't try and press them. They didn't try and attack them. It was just like they sort of couldn't be bothered to even fight for it. So with that kind of attitude, you're never going to get anywhere, and they thoroughly deserve to be dropping down the table. And I think I can only see bad results coming around the corner for them too. It's been a long time since they've shown any kind of desire or capability to win a game convincingly. So it's going to be a tough second half of the season for them. And I think, as you said, Steve Bruce he's never going to be the best manager in the world, but to an extent, when you appoint him as your manager, you know what you're expecting, you know what you're going to get. So they're probably just going to end up where they really expected to be, where they deserve to be, which is the bottom half of the table.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's true. And it's even more evident considering they had a pretty good transfer window. I think we all rated their transfer window pretty highly in the summer, but some of those players that have come in just haven't done the business yet. And if they don't, then yeah, they're going to underperform, which is what they've done. So not a great position for Newcastle right now. Okay, moving on to Sheffield United, a season of struggle so far for the Blades. And we've actually got a fan on this week. We've got Andy from Sheffield. And yeah, he's got a unique insight into being a Sheffield United fan this season. And yeah, I think Peter's got a question for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been a fun season for you so far. It's not very many positives to look at. I think obviously Matt and I have probably experienced bad times with the teams that we support, but probably not anything quite as bad as what you're going through right now. My question really was just wondering, when you sit down to watch a game, do you have any sort of element of optimism at this stage, or is it just purely sort of expecting defeat right from the beginning?
I think the optimism has slightly drained recently. the football gods have pretty much kicked us squarely in the bollocks for the last couple of months. When we first started, we always thought we could get out of it. We've seen us have bad spells before and bounce back quite quickly. And then mistakes have just crept in and confidence has drained off. And you just think, where's the next goal going to come from? Never mind the next win. At the moment, I think a good season would be beating Derby's record low total. There's nothing to really be optimistic about for this season. We're already looking forward to next season and hopefully having a good run at the Championship and bringing back some good times and just enjoying our football again.
What is it that's changed so drastically from last season? Obviously, you were a couple of points off Europe before the restart. And then, what do you think's happened since to make it go downhill so drastically?
I mean, there's a couple of things, really. Last year, we overachieved massively, and it was great to see. But this season, we've probably gone in the complete opposite direction, and we've just massively underachieved. Most players at the start of the season knew we wouldn't reach the same heights. But we thought there's at least 3 teams worse off than ourselves going into the season. We probably thought we'd finish 14th, 15th, 16th, but we'd be comfortably safe because we had quite a solid foundation last year. You saw how good we were defensively. We didn't make mistakes. We sort of hassled, harried teams, and we made it difficult for everyone. And then we'd always nick that goal that it'd either get us a point or 3. The one thing that's changed the most, I mean, it's a difficult argument for me to make because it's been the same for all teams, but not having fans in grounds affected us more than most, I'd say. You've got to remember we're a team made up of mostly high-end Championship players who they might not have the same level of quality that you find at other Premier League clubs. Our fans always seem to recognise that last season, so expectations were never really that high, and we'd get behind the players even after a big mistake, which I bet just made them feel like they were 10 foot tall. And like I said a second ago, we ended up with one of the best defensive records in the division. This year, we're making a big mistake or 2 every game, and it's just destroying the confidence each and every time we do it. You can see the players just don't seem to believe in themselves, in the daft mistakes that they're making. The fullbacks, the centre half, they're not bombing on anymore. The midfield, they're not pushing into the box and supporting. And our strikers just aren't taking any risks. So when a ball does come into the box, there's no one there to actually steer it home. The other thing is probably Jack O'Connell being out. He was probably a bit of a unknown quantity last season. Not many people had probably heard of him in the Premiership. But he's up there as one of the best English defenders that I've seen play in a long time. He got injured back end of last season, and we've just simply not replaced him. We've tried a few players in that position, but no one's been up to the job. It really does hold us back. We've got no threat down that left hand side, and he was probably the linchpin of a lot of our attacks last season. And without him, we're weak at the back, and we're just as weak going forward. So without him, it does make things a lot more difficult.
It's really interesting to hear you say that because, as a non-Sheffield United fan, if you'd asked me who's your key player last season, O'Connell would probably never have been like a person that I would have looked at because realistically, the only times I really watched you play was when you were playing one of the big teams on TV or when it was against West Ham. But obviously now it is quite clear to see that the dip in form really has coincided with him leaving the team, or not leaving the team, going out injured, and it's made such a huge difference. I think the other point you made as well, which I completely agree with, is just the attacking ability, the potency of the strikers. I remember clearly the game between Sheffield United and West Ham earlier this year. 2 or 3 big chances for Sheffield United to score, and they just weren't taken. And it's that kind of lack of clinical finishing and lack of being able to just get that spark in that moment that really stopped you really getting your first win of the season against the club that I support, which would have been disastrous for me. But maybe that would have turned your season around. So I think really it is those key issues. You can kind of get away with losing your defensive solidity as long as you've still got the attack, and you can get away with losing the attack as long as you've got maintained the defence. But to have both ends of the pitch just go massively downhill at the same time has not been kind to you guys at all.
I mean, I would tend to agree with what you're saying there about our strikers. We've spent about the best part of 50 million on our front two, but our best strikers at the club are still Billy Sharp and David McGoldrick, which it's mad really, and it's the same throughout the team. We've increased our depth since coming up, but in terms of transfers, we've not really strengthened the first team at all. And it's all right saying that Bernie and Brewster, great, we spent 50 million on them, but between them, they've got 6 Premiership goals or something like that. It's complete lack of potency.
And how much is that to do with Chris Wilder? Did you blame him for the situation you currently find yourself in as a Sheffield United fan, or do you think it's kind of out of his control and that players have just been underperforming?
It's a difficult one. I'll never slag off Wilder. What he's done for this club is magical. We've had some of the best times we've ever had. Ultimately, yeah, the responsibility lies with him. I would say that the majority of the transfers have been his decisions. I'm not sure how keen he actually was to get Sander Berg in. I don't think he's a very Wilder signing. You can tell he's got a bit of quality about him, but he just doesn't seem to fit the system. It's difficult. We can't just go out and get a Nathan Redmond or a Zaha, someone who has that quality for the teams of probably a similar stature, who can turn the game around. We're fishing in a completely smaller pond. We've not got the best scouting network abroad, and a lot of our recruitment comes from either youth players from Premiership teams who haven't quite made it yet, off-casts like Lys Mousset from Bournemouth last year, or high-end Championship players, and there's always a risk with them whether they can actually make the step up or not. And unfortunately, a lot of the ones we've signed more recently haven't quite made it to the required standard yet. So yes, it's Wilder's choices. He's made a lot of the signings himself, but we are fishing in a limited small pond, and he can't be completely blamed for that, I don't think.
Okay, moving on to the team currently sat 6th place in the Premier League, which I never thought I'd be saying, Southampton. What a season we've had so far. It's been a season of massively overperforming, in my opinion. We don't have the strongest squad in the Premier League, but we're really managing to get high quality performances every week out of this team. And it's credit to the manager, really. I think Ralph Hasenhüttl is probably one of the most respected managers in the league now for what he's done with Southampton. He's really turned us from a relegation battling team to a team that's almost challenging for the title, which is kind of crazy for me to even be saying right now. But we're just beating the champions from last season, and honestly, I don't think it could be going much better. 4 points off the top, and yeah, how much higher can we go? Do you reckon we're even in with a chance of Europe this season?
Yeah, honestly, I do. I mean, we've had these conversations a couple of times where I've just been really, really impressed by Southampton this year. I think all the key elements are there. There's well organised team, passionate manager who clearly has got a real good vision of where he wants to take the team, and then you can have all of those things, but they're never going to get you very far if you don't have really key players that sort of make your team tick. Your team's got that through and through. I mean, Danny Ings has been so vital. Shea Adams has really stepped up this year as well to be able to provide that other striking role. Ward-Prowse is always a threat on free kicks. I mean, the one moment I was really worried in the Southampton-West Ham game was when Ward-Prowse got that free kick on the edge of the box. And that was, that when you've got a player like that strikes fear into the opponent's hearts every time they give a free kick away, that's a real key element to the game as well. So, yeah, there's definitely a possibility. The only thing that's going to be a problem is just the league is just so tight around that part. There's not room to breathe in there. So all it takes is a couple of bad results and you really slip back down. And then it's so much harder to climb back up the table than it is to slide down it. But yeah, if you carry on with the form you've had, carry on picking up good results and manage to avoid injuries to those key players, and I don't see any reason why you can't be pushing for the top four. And another team that are definitely hoping to be able to pick up some better form again and push for Europe is Tottenham, who are currently sitting in 4th place. They were top of the table only a couple of weeks ago, weren't they? And then they've had some really bad results, arguably against good teams. They've lost to Liverpool and Leicester, and then they've drawn with Wolves, and then they've bounced back from that with a 3-0 win against Leeds. So, the signs are there that they've still got the ability to. When you've got players like Harry Kane and Heung-min Son consistently scoring goals and teaming up together, then there's no reason why they can't push forward again. But we've said it before and we'll say it again, Tottenham always find a way to bottle it. And I think if there is a team that are going to find a way out of that top four battle themselves, it's probably going to be them again, isn't it?
Yeah, I hate to say it, and probably Spurs fans hate hearing it, but bottle jobs is what you associate with Tottenham. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Mourinho can buck the trends with Tottenham. Obviously, they've had some very good results this season, scoring lots of goals. Son and Kane have been hugely instrumental throughout the season, and I expect them to continue being so. I guess the only concern for Tottenham is that bottle job nickname and whether they will actually live up to it. I think defensively they probably are a little bit suspect. They could do with one really notable centre-back in there, which they don't really have, never really have had. And I've actually seen some rumours recently linking Issa Diop with Tottenham. I don't know if you know anything about that, Peter. Do you think it's likely that Diop could swap for another London club?
Yeah, I think he actually got linked with them quite a while ago, and the sort of the rumours are resurfacing now, probably partially due to the fact that Craig Dawson's come in at West Ham and has actually done really well his last couple of games. So it's proof that we have got sort of defensive backup there. I think the only thing that will be a stumbling block there is that notoriously the West Ham board and the Tottenham board just do not deal with each other. They don't enjoy working together, and they have very serious differences of opinion on ways negotiations should be done. Without even realising it, you can look back and think that there's been very few transfers between either club, probably since Jermaine Defoe. So I think it's very unlikely that he would go there. I think he would, a couple of seasons ago when people were talking about it, he was more likely to go to Man United. But as we said, they're probably fairly set for their centre-backs anyway. But, if he did go there, it would be sad. I never want to see West Ham players going to Tottenham, but I think he probably would fit in really well there and would play a really key role for them because he definitely has got the ability to perform at the highest level. Right, so moving on to a team completely at the other end of the table, West Brom, 19th in the table, 8 points. Big Sam's come in and done the most un-Big Sam thing ever and just conceded loads and loads of goals and not improved them defensively at all. If anything, he's made them worse. It's going to be relegation for them, isn't it? If Big Sam can't turn it around, you're in big trouble.
Yeah, it's weird. Usually Big Sam comes into a club and instantly you see an impact. He goes into the training grounds and must lay down the law, like shout at players, just give them hell for leather. But doesn't seem like he's done that this time, or maybe he has, but the players just aren't listening. Not sure what's going on, but either way, nothing's changed at West Brom. And like you said, if anything, they've got worse. I watched their game against Arsenal at the weekend and they were dreadful. They didn't offer anything going forwards, didn't offer anything in defence either. So the writing's on the wall, I think, for West Brom. I don't think Big Sam will be able to keep up his reputation of being that guy to keep up every club that he's taken over. I think this could be the one that ends his streak. So, yeah, I really do think he's bitten off a bit more than he can chew here.
Yeah, I mean, it's been the year and the season where sort of everything that you never thought would happen has happened. And I think Big Sam getting relegated would be the perfect way to top that off, really, wouldn't it? As much as I do still have a soft spot for him, I can't see him turning it around. I think transfer-wise, I think they probably need to bring in 2 or 3 really sort of key, strong Premier League experienced players. Trouble is he can't bring in Kevin Nolan because he doesn't play anymore, so he's going to struggle there. I've heard rumours that he's interested in getting Andy Carroll back in. I can see that one happening. I don't know whether that's going to solve West Brom's problems up front or in defence.
If he thinks Andy Carroll is the answer to his problems, I think he's very deluded. More deluded than I ever thought he was. The fact that they've conceded 39 goals this season and they're not looking to bring in defenders over strikers is very surprising. I know Brexit's probably had a big impact on Big Sam's transfer targets, but yeah, I think they definitely need some stability at the back, and I don't think Premier League experience like Branislav Ivanovic is going to be enough, so they're going to need someone with a bit more life in them, I guess, than some 36-year-old almost retired ex-Chelsea centre-back.
Yeah, and if it is Brexit that's causing the problems for Sam, then he's got exactly what he's deserved, hasn't he? Because he was begging for it for the last 3 years. So I think it's quite ironic for him to be trying to push it through and then blaming Brexit for him not being able to get his players in to save his team. So moving on to Allardyce's former employers, West Ham United, my team, currently sitting bang in the middle, 10th in the Premier League, 26 points, so only 3 points off those sort of top 6, top 5 spots. I'm really pleased with it. Personally, I think it's way, way better than I hoped for. You may recall one of my other excellent predictions in our very first episode was that we'd be bottom at Christmas, considering Sheffield United are there on 2 points and we're 24 points off that. That bet was never going to come in, was it? But yeah, really happy with it. My only worry, as I've said many, many times, squad depth is just not there. We're very, very thin on the ground, and with more and more fixtures coming thick and fast over the next few weeks, we could start to see a dip in form again. But so far, I've got absolutely nothing to complain about.
Yes, credit to David Moyes, really. He's really moulded West Ham into that similar team mentality that he had at Everton. You know, the difficult to break down, very strong structurally, difficult to play against, and that's what West Ham have become now. They're a team that sides don't really like playing. They're difficult to break down, difficult to get points against. We saw that in their last game against Everton. Everton looked like they would be the team to really seek the initiative in that game, but West Ham just stuck in there and they got the goal at the end of the game and won it. So yeah, I think it says a lot about David Moyes and what he's brought to the team when everybody was writing him off And I guess it's credit to the players as well. You got some really standout players this season, like Souček, Antonio, obviously, and again, Rice is just one of those players who probably is destined for bigger things eventually. But as of right now, he probably is West Ham's most influential player on the pitch. So yeah, I mean, it's a good position for West Ham, and like you said, you're probably only a win off those top 6 teams. So if you were offered that at the start of the season, I'm sure you'd have taken it. So much like myself, I guess both our teams are massively overachieving this season.
Yeah, definitely. And it is nice to see. It's sort of a nice reward for both of us in terms of supporting teams that have so often disappointed us. It's quite nice to, for once, be pleasantly surprised by how our teams are doing. So the only danger with it is it's quite easy to get carried away with it as well. And we all know how that can end. It often ends in tears. But hopefully we'll both finish the season strong and end up with some good positions and, some European trips around the corner if we're even allowed to travel for them. So bringing us on to our final team in the Premier League, Wolves, who have had a really strange season. I open whatever app it is to look at the Premier League table, and I never actually know where I expect Wolves to be. I sort of feel like they should be up with the top 6 or 7, but then I also feel like sometimes looking at their results, they should be right down the bottom. And then probably fairly aptly, they're in 13th in the table. So I don't know. It's not been the same as it was for them last year, has it? Or the season before. They've definitely lost an element of that. Obviously, the key thing that you could talk about is Jimenez, but there feels like there's maybe more to it than that.
Yeah, you'd like to think there's more to it than that, but every time I've seen Wolves play since that Jimenez injury, they really look like they've just missed that spearhead through the middle. They don't have anyone in that squad who's capable of playing the same way as Jimenez is, and for a team that obviously rely on him to play their brand of football, I think it's a really, really key loss. Maybe it's a bit of an oversight to not have someone that plays exactly the same way as him in your squad. Yeah, it's disappointing for Wolves because obviously every season they chat about their lofty ambitions, they chat about their Champions League aspirations. It just doesn't look like it's going to happen again this season. And if anything, they'll be struggling to make the top 10. They're sitting outside the top 10 now. And looking at their squad, there's not really too much in there where you're like, oh, he's going to make the difference there. I mean, we've talked about Adama Traore before, and he's just been in and out of his team all season. And if anything, I'd want to move if I was him. If you're not playing regularly and you know what you can offer on the football pitch, which he offers a whole different set of skills that most players do, very unique talent. And I think he's got to be looking for a move. And if they lose him, then they've got to replace him as well, just like they would have to replace Jimenez. And I think they have to assign maybe 2 players this transfer window. And we mentioned a man earlier, Diego Costa. I think he'll be a perfect fit for Wolves. Spanish speaking, of course, which is a necessity. That's almost like purpose built, if anything, for Diego Costa. And I think he would come in and really have an impact with Wolves.
Yeah, it does seem almost like too good to be true, that transfer, doesn't it? You can just see it happening. And I think if they do manage to sign him and he's able to hit the form that we know he's capable of hitting, that could be the spark that they need to push them back up into the top half of the table where they've so consistently been since they came up to the Premier League. The only danger there is you think if he does really hit form, comes back in, does Jimenez get back into the team once he's fit and able to play? Because someone like Diego Costa is not going to be easy to convince him that he shouldn't be on the pitch. But yeah, I think that's definitely a transfer that could happen. Just going back to Adama Traore, I find it really strange because there's so many teams out there that are absolutely dying for a player like him that can just be something completely different, even just to sort of change up the way they play every now and then. And he's just so inconsistently in that team. I know he doesn't get loads of goals and assists every game, but I always look at him and think I would want him on the pitch in every single game just because he offers something that so few players do, that raw sort of strength and power and pace that he has. He's got all of those in absolute abundance. And on a good day, he will absolutely terrorise the defence. And on a bad day, he'll make it difficult for the defence and leave them something to think about, which means they might not be thinking about the other players, and then it gives them an opportunity. So I don't know why he doesn't play as much as he could for them. I think maybe that's one thing that I don't necessarily agree with their manager on, but given how well he's done for them, it's hard to sort of disagree with him too much.
All right, that brings them to another episode of the 3PL podcast. A big thank you to Andy for coming on and chatting all about Sheffield United. I think we all hope they get enough points this season to at least eclipse what Derby managed. Again, a big thank you to everyone who continues to listen each week. We'll be back again next week to preview all the upcoming games in the Premier League. Until then, make sure you are following us on social media on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and also make sure you are subscribed on YouTube to never miss an episode. And we'll catch you all again next week.